Hey folks, this is Jesse Cope, back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well, wherever y'all are, whatever y'all are up to at this point in your day. Appreciate y'all joining me as always, giving me a little bit of your time. For those of y'all that continue to share the podcast and to help it grow week after week, I'm extremely humbled and grateful, and I will try to use your time wisely. I'm going to take one of our little walks just past one cat off in the woods staring. But, you know, cats are going to do what they want to do, so I don't think they're going to come with us. Plane overhead, and the wife is out running up and down the road every once in a while, so y'all may hear from her. Nothing else really, except that it's hot still. I know that that's shocking to most of y'all. And we're going to get going, because we got a lot to cram in today. So I gave this a few days. Not even going to pretend to sugarcoat this, folks. We're going to go into Roe V Wade, and we'll just jump in. The whole tenor purpose of this, I feel like, after letting it sit for a few days and watching both locally here in my own hometown, people that I see and some of their reactions, and nationally, is that we've won a battle, folks, and it's important to acknowledge that statement. It's a battle, not a war, but a major battle, and we won it. And so what I'd like to do is just read through a couple quotes here by people who spent a pretty good chunk of their lives fighting for this. I'm going to start with Henry Hyde, and these are from a number of different sources today, folks. One of the big ones was the Patriots Bible again. So if you don't have a copy of that, I cannot recommend it enough. Henry Hyde served for 32 years in House of Representatives and was described as a passionate, eloquent champion and powerful defender of the unborn and of American freedom. Those two kind of have to go hand in hand. On July 16th, 1993, actually, speaking of that, I'm going to jump back here. So how do those go hand in hand? Okay, American freedom and the rights of the unborn. Because in Congress on July 4th, 1776, our founders wrote, signed, approved, whatever you want to use, Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, very first one, folks. Very first one. The fact that we've allowed this to go on for the last 50 years and still are. We're going to talk about that, folks, because this did not stop abortion in the United States. If you think that, it didn't. Life is the very first God-given right, God the Father of Jesus Christ the Son, God-given right that our founders put into the Declaration, the very first one. Okay, so we're going to go back to Henry Hyde now. Hyde, on 1993, July 16th, 1993, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator. Human beings upon creation, not upon birth. That is where our human dignity comes from. It comes from the Creator. It is an endowment, not an achievement. By membership in the human family, we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. They can't be voted away by a jury or a court, among which are life, the first inalienable right, the first endowment from the Creator, that is mainstream America. That is mainstream America, the predicate for our Constitution, our country's birth certificate, to respect the right to life as an endowment from the Creator. It is the unborn who are the least of God's creatures. We have been told that whatsoever we do for the least of these, we do unto Jesus. That's from Matthew 25:24. Inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. So what Representative Hyde here is saying is that if we're going to protect the unborn, the least of these, then it's as if we were protecting Jesus. And if we're going to kill them, murder them via abortion, it's as if we killed and murdered Jesus. Ronald Reagan, 40th President of the United States, stated, Abraham Lincoln recognized that we could not survive as a free land when some men could decide that others were not fit to be free and should therefore be slaves. Likewise, we cannot survive as a free nation when some men decide that others are not fit to live and should be abandoned to abortion or infanticide. My administration is dedicated to the preservation of America as a free land, and there is no cause more important for preserving that freedom than affirming the transcendent right to life of all human beings, the right without which no other rights have any meaning. That's what he's saying here again, folks, the very first unalienable right. If we don't honor that right, none of the rest of them matter. If we can take away the right to life, we can take away every single other right that we have in our Bill of Rights. That's why it's always amazing to me when people pick like the Second Amendment to get so fired up about, but ignore the first, or even really before that, ignore life. If we don't have life, then they can take anything away. And by they, I mean the government, if they want, or just our fellow citizens, even more importantly. If a mom can decide that she wants to murder her own baby, then if you get enough people together that decide something, that they want to take away something from any group or any individual, what's to stop them? If an unborn baby, who, as Representative Hyde said again, was the least of these, if we don't defend them, then how can we defend anything else? And what right do we have to expect to be defended on anything else? Stumbled across one. Well, I'm going to read Jeremiah. I wanted to read Jeremiah 1, verse 5, chapter 1, verse 5 real quick. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. And then Psalm 139:13. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. Folks, man, this sounds arrogant to even say. Obviously, I'm not perfect. I make some mistakes. You could ask people that know me really well. A couple of y'all that listen to this know this is true. But I see no possible way to justify abortion and at the same time claim to follow Jesus Christ. It is an impossibility. You cannot take away life from a child, choose to slaughter that child because they're a burden or an inconvenience, and at the same time claim to follow Jesus Christ, who told us to care for the widow and the orphan, to care for little children, the poor and the needy, the least of these, who was God as man. And God says he knew us in our mother's womb when he formed us. Before he even formed us in the womb, he knew us. Pope John Paul II addressed a crowd of over 375,000 people in Colorado in 1993 from 70 different countries. A culture of death. This is such a huge point, folks. I read through this. It bridges the gap for where I'm going here. I'm going to make some comments. The reason that this is a battle, and it's important to acknowledge that we won this battle, but it's also important to acknowledge that this was not the war, not even close, not even just on the issue of abortion alone was this the war. A culture of death seeks to impose itself on our desire to live and live to the full. In our own century, as at no other time in history, the culture of death has assumed a social and institutional form of legality to justify the most horrible crimes against humanity: genocide, final solutions, ethnic cleansings, and massive taking of lives of human beings even before they are born or before they reach the natural point of death. In much of contemporary thinking, any reference to a law guaranteed by the Creator is absent. There remains only each individual's choice of this or that objective as convenient or useful in a given set of circumstances. No longer is anything considered intrinsically good and universally binding. I would argue the reverse is true. There's very little that's considered intrinsically bad anymore, at least not that hasn't been twisted. The family especially is under attack, and the sacred character of human life is denied. Naturally, the weakest members of society are the most at risk: the unborn children, the sick, the handicapped, the old, the poor and unemployed, the immigrant and the refugee. You must feel the full urgency of the task. Woe to you if you do not succeed in defending life. The church needs your energies, your enthusiasm, your youthful ideas in order to make the gospel of life penetrate the fabric of society, transforming people's hearts and the structure of society in order to create a civilization of true justice and love. I want to make sure before I forget, folks, two huge points there at the end. When he's talking about youthful ideas, he's talking to some kids here, among many others, but he was an older man to begin with. But if we're not teaching our children about this subject and many others, but we're talking about this today, if we're not talking to them about abortion as soon as they're ready to bear that burden, be assured, folks, somebody else is. And the mainstream and culture are talking about a whole different message than the one you want your kids to have right now. They are absolutely this, as Pope John Paul II here said, a culture of death. That is what they're getting from most of society. Video games, books, TV shows, movies, public education to a certain extent, just constantly the left, which is the culture of death. We have a responsibility to teach our children the truth. And then the second thing is the structure of society. And we're going to talk about this just briefly, very briefly today. We'll get into it later again. But where did this come from? This ability to pass abortion in the last 50 years of slaughtering our own children in the United States came from a attack on the family, as Pope John Paul II here said, and a complete restructuring of the family unit so that it didn't go Christ, man, woman, children, that it went woman first, and then wherever the rest of them fall is fine. And we have got to get back to the true and rightful structure of family and society. That's a huge part there. So I wanted to run through just a few thoughts. I know that'll shock you, right? Based on a number of different actions that I've seen over the last few days, as I said, both nationally and locally. This is a battle won. This is not the war. And now is not the time for a return to this mentality of appeasement. Do not at all feel bad or guilty or that you have to somehow justify or clarify or qualify this win. You don't have to. We don't need to take a step back here and be like, yeah, okay, well, this is why we wanted to do this. And yeah, we know we got to focus on all these other things too. It's just so important to focus on sexism and oppression and racism and all these other things. No, just say face value straight up. We defended life. We fought for this. This is the right decision about defending life. I'm not going to get into all the politics of whether the Supreme Court should have made this ruling at this time or 2 or 3 years down the road. Just the fact is we were slaughtering our own children, and we've taken a step closer to preventing that across the board. I mean, the fact that we even have to have this discussion, folks, the fact that we have members of society that are absolutely rabid and angry. And again, I'm talking not just nationally here, but locally. Look around your own community, wherever you are in the U.S., a couple of y'all that listen, I see overseas, a growing number. Look in your communities where you live and look at these people that are just foaming at the mouth beside themselves about this decision from the Supreme Court, which again, I got to reiterate this, folks. And this podcast, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, it's going to go a little bit longer today. It doesn't even begin to end abortion in the United States. I shouldn't say it doesn't begin to, but it does not accomplish that task by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. If you don't understand this ruling, and I'm not an expert here, folks, on this, but I'm telling you, everything I've read, all this ruling did was push it back to the state level, which is great. It is a battle won. It is a huge battle won. I use the Midway example frequently throughout the podcast for those of y'all that have been here. But, you know, Midway is a battle in World War II where we had really been getting beat pretty handily in the Pacific by the Japanese time and time and time again. And then all of a sudden, in a matter of just, I don't even remember how many hours, we managed to sink 3, 4, 5 of their aircraft carriers. It was a huge turning point in the war, in World War II as a whole, specifically in the Pacific theater. Huge turning point, huge battle won, but it was a battle won, not the war. We still had a long, and the nastiest parts of the war, folks, every single aspect of this story, this event of Midway to me applies today to the United States. It was a battle won, not a war, and the nastiest, cruelest, most devastating parts of the war were yet to come. You can easily make the argument that it was a start that really finished off the Japanese and allowed the United States and the Allies to win the war as a whole. Certainly in the Pacific theater, at least. But remember this, hear this, please. The nastiest, worst parts of World War II came months and years after Midway. So, one, don't apologize for this win at all. Don't equivocate on it. Don't feel like you have to clarify it or justify it. The people that want to murder babies, if there was any possible way for them to justify that, that's their responsibility. There hasn't been for the last 50 years. There's still, the argument is, why have we allowed it for so long? Okay, the second thing is the left is angry, folks. And they're feeling vindictive and mad and just looking for anything that they can do to fight back. And I'm going to read you just a few headlines that I grabbed probably in less than 5 minutes. You've seen a ton. If you're watching the news, you've seen more than this. I saw many more than this, and I didn't even get them all. And again, it's important to recognize here, folks, the reason this is so important is because this decision has gone back to the states now, which means that it's the citizens, folks. It's not the national leaders. We have a heart problem, a soul problem. That's why the podcast is named The American Soul, because we have a soul problem in the people of the United States. Because if we were a moral and religious people, like John Adams said, then we would not be electing the kind of leaders that you see and have seen for decades and decades elected in the United States. So let me read you just a handful, folks. I mean, and I know some of these are just ludicrous in and of themselves. Stacey Abrams, failed Georgia governor candidate, right? Wants abortion without limit, including up to the moment of birth. You've got a couple of these. I saw Pink, for those of y'all that are familiar, said that she didn't want any pro-life Americans ever listening to her music ever again. A Green Day singer, who I know this is an old band, folks, this is out of date, but said that he's renouncing his U.S. citizenship because of the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, which is great. Sure, we'll, buy you the ticket. Anybody. I think that would be a good use of government funds. We've had multiple assassination threats. Justice Clarence Thomas is this particular one, but there have been multiple threats of violence, I should say. I don't know how many actual assassination attempt threats, or assassination threats, but the Supreme Court justices, they and their families, they are in danger. Defense Secretary, goodness gracious, folks, this one for those of y'all that have any association with the military. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin issued a statement suggesting that the Defense Department intends to maintain the military's access to abortion. Right? So regardless of what the Supreme Court said, which, I preach that here because the Supreme Court has made some horrific rulings ever since 47, which is what we're going to get to in just a second. But they're just going to go ahead and ignore it and do what they want to do anyway, which is what they've said. You've got multiple. I pulled one out of Colorado. A crisis center for pregnant women was vandalized and set on fire over the weekend. You've got others. That's just one story of many. Attempted murder of Los Angeles police officers Friday night. So from last week, amid protest of Roe v. Wade, you've got a lot of violence in a lot of these towns. And then, of course, you've got Starbucks, and I know there's a couple others. I can't pull any others, but, Starbucks has promised to pay for the interstate travel of people seeking abortion care, right? And also, I believe, gender reassignment surgery, at least for Starbucks. So we're gonna pay to ferry you from one state to another if this state does not approve abortion and that state does. As far as I can tell, completely within the right of the company. The point I'm trying to make here, folks, is it's not just the national leaders. It's the common everyday American citizen that is allowing for this and continuing this. So here's another one about the Supreme Court justices. Pro-choice protesters vowed to descend on the homes of the 6 conservative Supreme Court justices after posting their addresses online in the wake of Roe v. Wade. Representative Maxine Waters, to hell with the Supreme Court, we will defy them. Right? So, and that was it, folks. Those are the ones that I garnered. The point is, if you think that this is suddenly going to go quietly into the night, I hate to tell you this, but you're sadly mistaken. This was, again, I keep reiterating, a great battle won, overturning Roe v. Wade. But it did not end abortion across the board in the United States. Any state that still chooses to slaughter or allow women to slaughter their own babies is going to be allowed to. And then here's the last one. I told you I was going to go over. I won't go over a lot. But what is the root cause of all this? Why do I say that this is the battle and not the war? Because the root cause of all this goes back to the very last comments from Pope John Paul II. And that is the 1947 school board decision represented, or the societal changes represented in that Supreme Court decision in 1947 of Everson versus the school board. That separation of church and state decision where the Supreme Court twisted it around to reject God. What did that do? It did 2 things. It tried to divide, to cut the ties between our American founding and God. And you can't, folks. If you cut those ties, then you no longer have an American republic, because we are a Christian republic based on our founding. And then the second thing that it did through that was it completely started to restructure via feminism and the left, the family unit. It completely opened the door to attacks on the family unit. Because if you take God out, then you don't have that God-ordained family structure, and then anything goes, which is how we got to no-fault divorce, LGBTQ relationships, homosexual marriage as part of that, etc., abortion, all of these things, socialism and communism, everything goes back to that decision, or really what I'm trying to say here is the societal change represented by that decision, meaning that we now have a large chunk of the country that no longer acknowledges or stands for the founding principles of America based on the teachings of Christ. And so, going back to Midway, the Allies still had a long, nasty road ahead of them after Midway. It was a huge win, a miraculous win. It was one of those moments that I talk about where it's hard not to see God, because the ability to destroy all those aircraft carriers in a matter of hours it just shouldn't have happened. And yet it did. This overturning of Roe v. Wade is a huge win. But it's really, folks, I feel like we're just at the skirmisher stage. We're just really getting into the fight. We've been kind of asleep at the wheel for a long time, and I hope that I'm wrong here, but this may really turn into a real fight, folks. The left isn't going anywhere. And I'm not talking about the national leaders. I'm talking about the people that you know in your own community, wherever you are. They're not going anywhere. And they don't seem to be changing their hearts or their minds at all. They seem to be doubling down. And at some point that means that there's going to be a fight. But we've got to keep working until we get to the root cause of all these things, which is we have to get God back in our public institutions, our families, and in particular our education, our public education. God and Jesus Christ and those founding principles must be at the center of our families, not just as kind of oh yeah, I go to church every Sunday, or, once every couple weeks or whatever. I do what I tithe, I throw my $10 in there. We have to get, and not simply a recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance or even just the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of each school day, although that would be a nice start. We have to get God and Jesus Christ fundamentally, structurally back at the heart of our families and the heart of our institutions, particularly including our public education of our children. That's the war, folks. That's the war. And I heard the quote this weekend from my pastor, and I have seen it in a couple other places. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's against spiritual powers. And that's such a true statement, folks. There's some evil out in the world, and there always has been. But we've got to be aware of that. That's the whole battle, is to get back to God. Or the whole war, I'm sorry. So, anyway, I apologize for this being this long, but this was a huge deal, and a win that we should be extremely happy about and pleased with. But we've got to acknowledge that we've got a long way to go still. So, thank y'all for sticking with me. I hope that you got something out of it. The quote by Pope John Paul II, I feel like was a really good one. I have run across that, but it's been a few years, so hopefully that one at least gave something to you. God bless y'all and your families. Take some time to be a little bit encouraged. Wherever you have that sphere of influence, like Patrick Henry talked about, practice virtue and encourage it in others. Talk to them about the truth. God bless again your families and you and America. We'll talk to y'all again real soon. Looking forward to it.